Minai's journey. Mohsin Minai was unsatisfied with his conventional life as an enameller's assistant and set off to make his fortune. He wandered out of his native town looking for opportunities. He had just passed the main gate when someone whom he knew slightly called out, "Mohsin, if you want a job as an enameller, I know someone who has a vacancy." Minai said, "No, thank you. I've abandoned that kind of life, and I'm in search of better things." If, however, he had taken the offer, he would soon have become a famous enameller and a revered artist, for such was the end of the opportunity whose beginning he declined to accept. This encounter made him all the more anxious to follow his destiny. He said to himself, "If I had not started on my journey and had only sat in that enameller's booth in the bazaar, I would not have been given that chance to become a fully fledged enameller for several years, so I see that in travel there is opportunity." He continued on his way. Presently he met a stranger who asked him, "What is your occupation?" "I'm a master enameller," said Mohsin, thinking to himself, "Well, I would have been such by now if I had stayed in my own town. Why then should I represent myself as only an assistant?" The stranger said, "My sister is getting married, and I would like to give her some unique enamel article. Would you care to make it for me, if I were to give you all the materials and facilities?" "Certainly," said Mohsin. So he settled down in the nearby village and made a magnificent enamelled bracelet for the wedding. Minai said to himself, "Here I am making money and earning credit and admiration by assuming a stature which I did not have before in men's eyes, but which I am manifestly able to sustain." He had bought a shop from the proceeds of his first large independent commission, and thought that he would spend some time in that particular town. But not long afterwards someone came into the shop and said, "I'm an enameller seeking somewhere to settle down. I would like to buy your business." And he offered Mohsin such a very large sum of money for his shop and its goodwill that the transaction was soon completed, and Minai was on the road again. After a day or two on his journey, Minai was attacked by brigands who took all his money and left him stripped, beaten, and helpless by the road. Minai did not realize that if he had stayed where he was, he would have been very much worse off, because on that very day the shop which he had sold was swallowed up by an earthquake, and his successor was killed. Minai lay there bemoaning his fate and his lack of ability to stick to one thing, regretting his selling the shop because of greed. Presently a charitable man passing that way approached the luckless enameller. "Come to my house," he said, "and I will help you." Minai went to his new friend's house and stayed there while his wounds healed. The man gave him a job in his garden, and Minai spent 3 years there, afraid to travel again, in case he was unlucky and something unfortunate should happen to him. He congratulated himself at the same time upon his own humility in being able to suspend his ambitions and upon his capacity to fill such a humble post as a gardener, when he was really a craftsman. He regarded himself as specially virtuous in repaying his debts to his rescuer by serving him in exchange for such instant compassion as had been shown to a penniless wanderer. What Minai did not know, however, was that if he had stayed there by the wayside, something completely different would have happened. The brigands had soon quarrelled when ill luck struck them several times in succession. The leader was killed by his second-in-command, who brought back all Minai's money, and more as well, and threw it down on the spot where Minai had been lying to get rid of the curse. When he had worked for 1,000 days in his patron's garden, Minai begged permission to leave, and he made for the nearest town. He got himself a job as an enameller's assistant, and in due course worked his way up to the position of head enameller with a goldsmith. "Now," he said to himself, "I am really back on the track again, because this is where I would have been if I had never had such ideas of greatness, and had not started on my journey at all." But what he did not know was that his imaginings about his own humility and his vain belief that all the events in his life formed some sort of coherent whole were the barriers to his real progress. When, through a misunderstanding, Menai was arrested and convicted for embezzlement, he started to rearrange his thoughts like this. If I had only stayed where I was, I would have been better off, but such misfortunes as the present one are only trials, and I must be patient. What he did not realize and never understood throughout his entire life was that various events are part of different cause and effect threads in a life. Anyone who tries to put them together into one whole story, flattering to himself by postulating a single destiny, will meet with a kind of result which is no test of humility and patience at all, but a payment for his own stupidity. People who always imagine that they are under test when they are being requited are suffering from vanity which prevents them from even imagining that at some time or other they may be reaping the harvest of something sown by them.
Accumulated supplications. It was an established custom in a certain place for people to visit a shrine and to pray there for good fortune. They gave a small offering to the dervish who looked after the place, towards his upkeep, and for charity. After many years of this tradition, whose very origin had by then been forgotten, a really needy man arrived. But he asked for nothing. At the moment of his arrival, a charitable individual came upon him. The charitable man said, "I have made a vow to give away all my money at this place to the first person I meet." He bestowed every penny of his wealth upon the truly needy man. One of the disciples of the dervish asked the inner meaning of this transaction. The dervish, full of wisdom, told him, "The accumulated supplications were waiting for a needy man who did not ask. As soon as he appeared, the right aspirations operated, and the prayers were able to take a true effect. But the people believe that the shrine itself brings them good fortune," objected a bystander. "It brings good fortune to those worthy of it. The unworthy attribute their luck to having been at the shrine. But attribution is often different from origin."
The Magician. There was once a man who travelled all over the world and studied in every place of real learning. Because of his retiring ways, opinions were for long divided as to whether he was a devout and worthy man, or whether perhaps he was some kind of magician, alchemist, or even astrologer, a follower of reprehensible arts. Consequently, his house was besieged by two kinds of people: those who sought his blessing, if he were to be revealed as a man of learning, and those who wanted to enlist his aid in some mundane enterprise, should they discover that he was possessed of secret arts. This man, known by the name of Abdul Wahid, son of Aswad, eventually acquired the repute of a sorcerer and necromancer. The consequence was that people who imagined that they were sincere and praiseworthy shunned him. Those who sought the help of a sorcerer continued to seek him out. When, however, the potential magicians and buyers of talismans and charms entered his presence, he soon sent them away. He did this by convincing them that he only pretended to be a magician. In this way, he was able to shed them more rapidly and completely than would otherwise have been possible. Hence, to his ordinary repute of magical activity was added the charge, spread by the disappointed, of charlatanism, even in that doubtful vocation. This man was, in fact, a Sufi. He discouraged the passionate believers in their own sincerity, because such people are almost always only superficially sincere. Their reality is self-deception, and they are more difficult to help than those who have no such prejudice in their own favour. Their belief was stronger than their sincerity. Ibn Aswad's beneficent influence and the results of his work continue. But because of his methods of self-concealment and self-defense, few Sufis may now mention the debt which everyone in the world owes to Abdul Wahid, son of Aswad.
How to prove it. 2 people of the land of fools were talking. The first said, "I'm no idiot, I can multiply numbers." The second said, "I don't believe it." "I bet you this silver coin that I can," said the first. "Go ahead then, let's hear you," said the second. "Here you are," said the first man. 2 and 2 are 99. "Fair enough, here's your money."
The Reflection Chamber at Doshambe. The manner of tiling of the walls of the reflection chamber of Doshambe was thus. Hamid Parsa asked his disciples, some of them tile craftsmen, to arrange for the chamber, Dar el-Fikr, to be tiled. They made a start on the work, and then it was delayed by a variety of obstacles. Hamid Parsa made inquiries from time to time, and in the end the master craftsman said, "O Pathfinder, we have not enough men, and we have not succeeded in tiling the walls, and we think it would be better to say this now, since such a long time has elapsed, and you may probably wish to make other arrangements, so that the chamber shall be completed for whatever use you desire it." Hamid Parsa answered, "Very well, leave this work, and I will arrange for its completion." The craftsmen were assigned to other tasks. After 2 years, Hamid Parsa called them in and showed them that the walls were impeccably tiled, with glazes and workmanship of the highest quality and astonishing beauty. After Hamid died, it was discovered that his frequent absences from the tekia were due to his having spent his time in a tile yard, where he had made the necessary tiles himself. Later he had fixed them in the walls, without mentioning this to anyone, except certain assistants whom he asked to say nothing about the matter. His successor, Miran Jan, was asked, "Why did the Pathfinder not tell us that he had done this work himself?" Miran answered, "His explanation to me was that if he told you, you would feel rebuked, and that you were not in a condition in which rebukes were useful. Or, he said, they would, in laziness, masquerading as proper admiration, regard me as some kind of wonder. Their trouble is laziness. My need was for the tiling. So I worked on the tiling, and I gave them work to do to improve their condition of laziness."
Invisible. A well-known Sufi was asked, "What is invisibility?" He said, "I shall answer that when an opportunity for a demonstration of it occurs." Some time later, that man, and the one who had asked him the question, were stopped by a band of soldiers. The soldiers said, "We have orders to take all dervishes into custody, for the king of this country says that they will not obey his commands, and say things which are not welcome to the tranquillity of thought of the populace." The Sufi said, "And so you should, for you must do your duty." "But are you not Sufis?" asked the soldiers. "Test us," said the Sufi. The officer took out a Sufi book. "What is this?" he said. The Sufi looked at the title page. "Something which I will burn in front of you, since you have not already done so," he said. He set light to the book, and the soldiers rode away, satisfied. The Sufi's companion asked, "What was the purpose of that action?" "To make us invisible," said the Sufi. For to the man of the world, visibility means that you are looking like something or someone he expects you to resemble. If you look different, your true nature becomes invisible to him.
The Mantle. Once upon a time, a traveller was shipwrecked on a remote and unvisited island. He was dragged out of the sea half drowned, and looked after by the kindly inhabitants, who nursed him back to health. After a time, this man began to notice something quite unusual in the local people. They had, compared to him, very short memories indeed. This made it difficult for them to store up, compare, and communicate experience to one another. As a result, each generation had to learn anew, and in many cases each person had to experience the same thing again and again before he could profit by experience at all. The traveller also noticed that if he wore the mantle which had been wrapped around him when he arrived, this served to maintain his own memory. Otherwise it became weaker and weaker. He realized that the garment in some way counteracted the local climate, which was responsible for causing amnesia and maintaining it. So this mantle became, as it were, the stranger's robe of distinction. People respected him, mainly because of his memory. He started to manufacture these robes and tried to get the people to wear them. It was, however, against their customs, and many were opposed to wearing them because they associated them with the great power and superiority of their visitor. He was, however, able to induce some people to wear the robes. They, providing that they made the often forgotten effort to remember, found themselves now endowed with memories. The majority of the people continued to wear no robe, or else to affect them without making the necessary efforts, and in time all that was effectively left of the knowledge and its application was the phrase in the language of that people, to assume the mantle, or to be invested with a robe, denoting distinction and authority. Like all people everywhere, the people had confused distinction and authority, elegance and prestige, with that which underlies it, capacity. That island is still there. So are its people. The traveller has passed on his way. The robes continue to perform the decorative, ritualistic, and emotion-arousing functions which the people now regard as appropriate to them.
Salute to the Thief. Junaid of Baghdad was passing the scene of a public hanging, where a thief was on the scaffold. Junaid bowed towards the criminal. Someone asked him, "Why did you do that?" Junaid said, "I was bowing before his single-mindedness. For his aim, that man has given his life."
The Medicine. A Sufi teacher on his deathbed gave a bundle of papers to his disciple and said, "Take these. Some are written upon and others not. Those which are blank are as valuable as those which are not." The disciple took the papers and studied those on which there was writing. The others he kept just as carefully, waiting until their value might be vouchsafed. One day he was lying in a caravanserai, ill and shuddering with a fever, and a doctor was called as he seemed on the point of death. The doctor said, "We have no time to lose. Find a piece of paper of fine quality upon which I may write a talisman for the relief of his malady." The other people present looked all around. Searching the traveller's knapsack, they came upon some blank sheets in the bundle of writings of the Sufi teacher. The physician tore up a sheet, and on it he inscribed a strange figure. "Steep this in water," he said. "When the ink has dissolved, give it to the patient, and he will be well in 3 hours." They did as he directed, and the disciple was soon cured. The effect had been due to a medicament which had been smeared by the wise man upon the blank page, unknown to anyone else. When the disciple arrived at the abode of a venerable dervish and told him of his experiences and desired to know the meaning of the blank pages, the dervish said, O one of great prospects, you were cured by the virtue in the page, not by the talisman." "But," said the disciple, "why did I not know the secret of the blank pages?" "When you are saving a life," said the dervish, "it is the saving of the life which is important. The talk comes later." The disciple retraced his steps and sought the doctor who had treated him. The doctor had moved to a distant land, and it was only after many vicissitudes that he found him. He asked, "What were the circumstances which led to your deciding to inscribe a talisman on paper for me that day in the caravanserai?" The doctor said, "When I was the pupil of a great dervish who always concealed his miracles, he told me, 'One day you will be called to see a man lying sick in a caravanserai. If he has such and such a type of fever, call for plain paper and write a diagram on it. Then have him swallow the water in which the diagram has been immersed. The fever will abate in 3 hours.'" The disciple asked, "Were you given any instruction about what to do if there was no paper?" The physician said, "My teacher said when I asked him that, 'If there is no paper, it will be a man who has been heedless of his duty, one who is unmindful of the orders of sages. He will have brought death upon himself. If there is no paper there at that moment, the patient will die.'"
Interpretation. A certain dervish teacher used to spend 6 days of each week in meditation. On the 7th, he would journey to the town nearest his zavia and walk from one shop to another, drinking tea and holding impromptu conversations. On one of these occasions, a stranger saw him tasting honey cakes in company with a certain scholar. The stranger, whose knowledge of Sufism was limited to popular conceptions of the devoutness of dervishes, exclaimed aloud in the marketplace, "Shame upon the dervish who consorts with mere pedants! When a man has the choice of significant inner reflection and yet pursues childish things, he is surely far from attainment." Among those who heard him were some who were better informed as to the teacher's repute, but not his mode of action. They said, "This man of knowledge is, no doubt, sharing his wisdom with mere ordinary folk, for have Sufis not always proclaimed that academics are at all times profoundly in need of converse with men of real experience?" This thought shamed the critic. He imagined that he had learned something through what was really a shallow rebuke, based upon generalizations. That night, however, a subtle visitant appeared to him and said, "Because you have felt real regret, you may have a real interpretation as to the case which had perplexed you. Know, therefore, that dervishes act upon others in a manner often unsuspected by those who benefit, and unimagined by observers. The inner effect upon the scholar, due to his companionship with the dervish, is 1,000 times greater if the dervish does not dispute with him. It is powerful, even if the dervish does not speak of any matter of supposed consequence at all. An enlightened dervish, who is silent or even talking about flies and ants, is having a far greater effect upon the world than a scholar talking about theories and speculations, or a sentimentalist who thinks he has deep feelings.
Qualities. Hida once met a pious man and said to him, "What can I do for you?" The man said, "Do nothing for me, but on your travels help my disciples." Hida asked him, "How shall I know them?" "By their names," said the pious man, "which I shall give you." "We of the invisible world," said Hida, "do not recognize people by their names, but by their qualities." "There is no difficulty about that," said the pious man, "for I can list the qualities of my 3 disciples. The first is charitable, the second is abstemious, and the third is master of himself." Hida promised, saying, "It is in any case my duty, as a member of the invisible government to aid such as those. Soon afterwards, Chida came across a man who was almost penniless, and saw him give his last coin to a deserving woman. But Chida passed by without helping him. Then he paused to watch a man who was lecturing people on abstention and praying for divine aid in his work. Chida did nothing for him. Finally, Chida saw a man jumping for joy at being alive, even though he had a terrible disability. Chida did not approach him. When Chida returned from his journey around the earth, he again met the first pious man, who said, "Did you encounter my disciples and help them?" Chida answered, "I had to help all the deserving people whom I met, but I did not see 3 worthy ones such as you mentioned to me." "Would you describe any whom you could not help?" asked the pious man. Chida told him about the 3. "But those are the men of whom I spoke," said the pious man. "If this is what you have taught them to do," said Chida, "you may be pious, but you are sadly astray." The first man was giving away money and enjoying the act, which therefore repaid him immediately in kind. He is not charitable. The second man was only abstemious in some things. He was greedy for conversion and divine favour, and did not abstain from that greed. The third man is master of certain things, but certainly not of himself.
The Journey. Iftikhari relates, "I was sitting in the circle of Sheikh Abbas Ansari one day when a youth came in and asked for help. 'I am going on a journey,' he said, 'and I would be grateful if you could give me introductions to the Sufis of Persia.' The Sheikh inquired as to the young man's route. Then he said, 'I'm sorry, I cannot give you any introductions.' The visitor went sorrowfully away. As soon as he had gone, the Sheikh started dictating letters to his representatives in Persia, on the route named by the young man. I wanted to ask him the reason for this extraordinary behaviour, but the etiquette of the sessions prevented it. Several evenings later, when we were gathered together after a contemplation session, Sheikh Abbas said to us all, 'If I had told that young man to visit certain of our friends, and that he would be welcomed, he would have been unable to learn, because I would have removed from his mind the determination to struggle, without which he could not have benefited from the meetings. I would also have given him an increased expectation, which would have been a barrier to his understanding.' I said, 'But will he not think that he is unworthy and perhaps not attempt to make the journey? If he does that, it would be a sign that he is in any case lacking in the necessary resolution, and he would not have succeeded in anything.' I asked, 'But will he perhaps think of you as not interested in his welfare, since you refuse to help?' The Sheikh answered, 'If he can turn against me so easily, then he cannot in any case learn. He would be like a dog which is refused a bone, and which would snap at whoever refused him, without thinking why.' I said, 'Is it undesirable for someone to feel gratitude towards another for his help?' 'Gratitude towards another has a limit. To rely too much on the help of another leads to despising oneself and ends in opposition towards that other person. That is one reason why some people oppose those whom they have once admired. They owe them too much.'
The way which seems to lead to worthlessness. It is related of the Hazrat Bahauddin Naqshband that although he was for many years regarded as the very incarnation of gravity and politeness in public, and the restorer of the original school of Sufism, he often behaved like a clown when with close and influential associates. For decades he swore them to secrecy about this, and obtained from each one a signed statement that he was given to eccentric behaviour. Time and again they said to him, "Hazrat, we do not understand your peculiarity, but we will tell nobody about it. Why, therefore, do you accumulate evidence about it, signed documents which might at any time be produced in public to your disadvantage?" He never answered these queries until, toward the end of his life, burdened by the weight of grave and dignified followers who insisted upon their version of his weightiness, he started to act in an unconventional manner. Some of his more determined and most superficial followers were told to leave him. They said, "Alas, he is taking leave of his senses. To think that he was for so long such a paragon of conduct, and an example to the whole world." Then Bahauddin produced the documents which showed that he had always been of the same nature, and that it was the followers who had tried to make him into their own image of a man of the teaching. He says in his Risalat, letters, "It is of the greatest importance that the Sufi should be able to be a fool and still be a Sufi. He must be able to appear an idiot, because when pedants monopolize the role of man of learning, there must be people among whom real learning subsists. Mark one danger. Opposition to Sufis is not dangerous to them, because there will always be some people who will think that the opposition is due to jealousy and will therefore continue to try to follow the way. But as soon as the scholars succeed in making people think that Sufis are devoid of serious consideration, not worth anything, people will not listen to Sufis, because if man has a weakness, it is not to want to seem as if he is interested in anything worthless. Keep open the road which seems to lead to things of no consequence, viewed from the pedant's and the fanatic's eyes."
Conviction. Talal Nazaf was received with great honour at the court of Cordoba. His reputation had been known there for many years. Courtiers and emirs vied with one another to speak well of him. A certain scholar, however, asked him this question: "I have read your books and wonder why so much in them is directed towards the stupid and so little towards the wise." Talal said, "Most of it is directed towards such as you." That evening he was taking a meal at the house of the Grand Qadi judge, who remarked, with delicacy, "A certain robustness of speech here in Cordoba might cause those who are well-disposed, and yet sensitive, to change their attitude towards a newcomer." The Sufi said, "Those who have observed that such sensitivity, acted upon by forthrightness, produces hostility, have learned that such a change is merely a change of opinion. I am here to demonstrate that a change of opinion is in itself not a change of understanding. Opinion is built upon sand. Knowledge is built upon rock. If a man is only convinced that I am good, he may be as stupid as one who is only convinced that I am bad. Conviction, far from being based upon reason, is the enemy of reason, because rationality does not change, while convictions do, all the time."
Salik on the road to Kandahar. Salik met a party of men on the highway to Kandahar. Salik was dressed like a tanner, and one of the party, who was greatly respected by them, was wearing the robe of a Sufi. Salik asked him, "What are you?" The man answered, "A Sufi." Salik immediately drew a long knife and advanced towards the man, who showed every sign of fear. "Why are you trembling?" asked Salik. I fear you may kill me, said the other man. Will you give me your money if I spare your life? Asked Salik. Yes, indeed, said the other. Salik now addressed the rest of the party. This man is no Sufi. He is afraid of death and will give money in return for life. A Sufi is one who cannot be manipulated by fear or desire.
The Legend of the Hidden Physician. In a certain country there was a physician. He lived at a time when medical skill was, in most places, at a low level. He decided, because of this, to make his knowledge available in the farthest west of the continent in which he lived. In that land, called Gharb, medical knowledge was almost non-existent, though in every other way its inhabitants had developed a high culture. Being wise as well as learned, our physician made extensive inquiries about the people of Gharb before he went there. He discovered, among other things, that there was a tendency among the Gharbs to possess themselves of anything useful that they might hear about, and use it in a destructive manner. Certain despots, again, were known to get hold of valuable facts of knowledge and preserve them for their own private use. He therefore caused a rumour to circulate, to the effect that there was a doctor in a far-off land who knew the remedy to many ailments. Many people set off in search of him, mostly for the wrong reasons, for they were citizens of Gharb. Because of their eagerness, some say greed, certain of these travellers actually believed that they had found the wonderful doctor. Sometimes they met him but did not know it. They then thought that their malady had been healed by some other means. Sometimes they thought that their sickness had cured itself. What was really happening was that the doctor, concerned only with healing and preservation, lived incognito among his patients. He also had representatives in other countries. These people said that they had cures for various diseases, but that they were very expensive. There was, in fact, no charge, and the medicines cost nothing at all. How, then, was the money spent? It covered the travelling expenses of the doctor, who often had to journey personally from a great distance to examine a patient, generally without the patient's knowledge, and prescribe a course of treatment. Because, for necessary reasons, the procedure was concealed, the patients often assumed that the time taken for the medicine to work was something to do with the relationship between the body and the prescription. In reality, of course, the passage of time corresponded to the period which it took the doctor to travel to his patients. Imagine now what happened when this doctor died. All the misinformed intermediaries continued to talk about the distant cure, the time, and the cost. They did not know that another physician, nominated by the first, succeeded him, and carried on the treatments in a way suited to changed conditions and his own individuality. He did not always choose the same representatives or their successors.
Grammar. A scholar, who was also a noted grammarian, went to see a Sufi teacher. He was surprised to find that the Sufi did not lecture, cajole, or advance carefully constructed proofs for what he was doing. When he had the opportunity, he asked the Sufi, "Why do you not teach in a coherent manner? You must know the simple beginnings of your law as well as the more abstruse aspects. We scholars at least take note of the ignorance of beginners and lead them by degrees from simple things into advanced knowledge." The Sufi said, "I can illustrate this to you only if you will undertake a short course of instruction, and ask no questions. The Sufi was a man of such repute that it was believed that he could work miracles. Because the scholar was hungry for knowledge, he agreed. The Sufi said, "You are a grammarian. Very well. Every day you shall collect the local cats and dogs and lecture them on the very earliest and most simple aspects of grammar." Thinking that this was a test, or that it would lead to a miracle, the scholar obeyed. After several months, the Sufi called the scholar to him and said, "Have the cats and dogs learned any grammar?" "No," said the grammarian, "none at all." "Why do you suppose that this is the case?" "Because they cannot speak or understand speech. They have to learn that first, if it is possible." "That is the answer to your original question," said the Sufi master.
Only 3 men in the world. Once upon a time, when the sons of Adam had multiplied exceedingly, calamities began to increase. Some of these calamities were called disease, some were called the folly of men, some were of unknown origin and meaning. People banded themselves into tribes and nations so that they could endure, repel, or escape these calamities. People grew apart and ceased to understand themselves and even one another. Those forms of activity which men had devised, imitated, and learned, even from insects, now prevented them from giving their attention to some of the purposes for which men were originally distributed upon the earth. The dervish teacher Kidder travelled far and wide among the various sections of mankind, in deserts and towns, in islands and mountains, in villages and nomad camps, looking for people who might be able to hear his message. The real welfare of man is the same as the real welfare of men. But the strange fact was that there were only 3 men in the whole world who could hear him speak. Kidder said to the first man, "Come with me on a journey, for it may perhaps do you some good." The first man followed him, and presently they came upon a river. As they looked at it, Kidder asked, "What would you like that river to be to you?" The man said, "I would like it to obey my commands so that I could make it work for me, and that by its use I could benefit myself and also others." "Very well," said Kidder. They continued on their journey, and presently they came upon a mountain. Kidder said, "What would you like that mountain to be to you?" The man said, "I would like it to give me its knowledge, for it has been here longer than I. Then I could make use of the knowledge and pass on some of it to others." "Very well," said Kidder. They went on their way, and next they arrived at a country of smiling fields and fruit-bearing trees. "What would you like this country to be to you?" asked Kidder. "I would like to have this country, for I could then live here and pass my remaining years instructing others in the wisdom which I have gained," said the man. "Very well," said Kidder. And then Kidder left this man, and in due time all these things came to pass. Now Kidder found the second man who could hear him, and invited him to accompany him on a journey. Together they set off. They came upon a wise man who was talking to the people, and Kidder asked the second companion, "What would you like this man to be to you?" "I would like this man to accept me as his successor, so that when he died I could carry on his teaching," said the second man. "Very well," said Kidder. They continued on their way, and presently they came upon a gathering of men who were oppressing some innocents. "What would you like to be able to do in these circumstances, if you had the choice?" asked Kidder. "I would like to be able to remove this oppression from those innocents and punish the wicked," said the man. "Very well," said Kidder. They continued on their way, and later they arrived at a town where the people had many qualities, but yet had become so narrow-minded that they would not leave the town in order to share their abilities with others. "What would you like to be able to do about this?" Kidder asked his companion. "I would like to be able to convince all these people that they have a duty to share what they know with everyone in the world," said the man. "Very well," said Kidder. And he left this man, having granted his wishes. Then Kidder went and found the third man, the last man in all the world who could hear him, and asked him to accompany him on a journey. The man agreed. They had not been travelling very long when they came to a place where there were nobles and slaves, high and low, and people of a middling state as well. "What would you like to be able to do in such a situation?" asked Kidder. "I would like to be able to do what is really right," said the man. "Very well," said Kidder. They continued on their way, and when they came to some people who were hungry since their crops had failed, Kidder asked his companion, "Would you like these people to be fed?" The man answered, "I would like them to be content with poverty when it is best for them, and discontented with it when that is right for them." "Very well," said Kidder. They continued on their journey, and presently they arrived at a place where people all appeared pious and obedient, where they maintained law and order, and where everyone seemed contented with his lot. "What would you like to do with these people?" asked Kidder. "I would like them to be able to understand exactly what is good for them, and what they could be doing and feeling," said the man. "Very well," said Kidder. Kidder, after granting this man's 3 wishes, left him. And it is from these 9 aspirations of the only 3 men in the world who could hear Kidder that every kind of human enterprise and preoccupation is derived. It was the work of the third man, however, which found acceptance with Kidder, and which is working its way out through successive generations of men.